A humble fisherman saves the life of a powerful businessman's son, but instead of accepting a reward, he demands a confession that could destroy empires and reveal a web of lies. How far will he be willing to go for justice? The full moon illuminated the cliff, where waves crashed violently against the rocks. Henrique, with his worn boots and his flashlight in hand, walked slowly towards the sound of a recent crash. His instinct told him that something was not right. A few meters away, he found an overturned car, its wheels spinning slowly in the air. The engine was still humming weakly. Without a second thought, he ran towards the vehicle. Inside, a young man was struggling to get out, his face full of panic. "Calm down!" Henrique shouted, his voice firm, hiding his own anxiety. He slid through the rubble and managed to open the car door with a monumental effort. The smell of fuel filled the air. The young man, Gabriel, trembled as Henrique carefully pulled him out. In the distance, a spark from the car's engine warned them that there was no time to lose. With a last effort, Henrique lifted the boy onto his shoulders and pulled away from the vehicle just before it exploded in a deafening explosion. When they were both safe, Gabriel tried to speak but coughed, unable to utter a word. Minutes later, the lights of a pickup truck approached. An elegant man in an impeccable suit ran out toward them. It was Paulo Torres, Gabriel's father. "Gabriel, thank God!" she exclaimed, hugging her son tightly. Then she turned to Henrique with a look full of gratitude. "You saved my son. I don't know how to thank you." Henrique, breathing heavily, raised his hand to stop any further words. "I don't want money," he said firmly, his eyes reflecting something deeper than a simple rejection of a reward. "I want something more important." Paulo frowned, surprised. "What could be more important than money? Tell me, anything." Henrique stared at him, his voice taking on a serious, almost defiant tone. "I want you to confess what you did with your chemical industry. I want you to admit how you destroyed my community." Paulo's face froze. For a moment, the gratitude in his eyes gave way to a shadow of discomfort. Henrique didn't wait for an answer. He turned and began walking into the darkness of the night, leaving Paulo with his son in a whirlwind of thoughts. Translated from Spanish to English, www.onlinedoctrinslator.com. Gabriel watched Henrique walk away, intrigued by the strength and sadness in the fisherman's eyes. Something in his words resonated with him, though he still didn't understand why. Meanwhile, Paulo fell silent, his mind already working frantically on how to handle what had just happened. Dawn bathed the coast in golden hues, but for Henrique, the landscape no longer held the same charm as before. Since the explosion of the chemical industry, financed by Paulo Torres, his world had changed irreversibly. As he mended his nets in the small port, memories of the disaster came back like uncontrollable waves. It was a night like any other when the explosion occurred. Henrique and other fishermen had gone out early to take advantage of the tide. From the sea, they saw the glow of the fire and heard the screams coming from the shore. When they returned, the devastation was unimaginable. The water was contaminated, dead fish floated on the surface, and the air was unbreathable. Many of his neighbors lost their homes, and others, their lives. His wife, Clara, had fallen ill soon after due to the toxins. By the time they sought medical help, it was too late. Henrique paused for a moment, squeezing his eyes shut, trying to push away the pain. The community had fought for justice, but Paulo's connections to powerful politicians and businessmen buried any hope. Protests were organized, letters were sent, but it was all in vain. Over time, people resigned themselves, but not Henrique. The loss of his wife and the suffering of his neighbors were scars that could never heal. Meanwhile, in his luxurious mansion, Paulo Torres held a glass of whiskey, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Henrique's words kept echoing in his mind. "I want him to confess." Beside him, a group of lawyers discussed strategies to neutralize any threat the fisherman might represent. "He's just a desperate man," said one of the lawyers, adjusting his glasses. "If he pushes us, we can easily discredit him." Paulo nodded, but his expression remained grim. He knew Henrique was no ordinary man. He had seen in his eyes a determination that few possessed. However, he could not afford to show weakness. "I want you to investigate everything about him," Paulo ordered, his voice full of authority. "Find something we can use against him." As the lawyers left, Gabriel entered the room, still slightly injured from the accident. He approached his father cautiously. "Why did that man ask for that?" Gabriel asked, curious. "He didn't seem to want money. He seemed to want something else." Paulo looked at his son, considering whether he should share the truth or divert the conversation. Ultimately, he opted for the latter. "He's just a man looking for someone to blame for his misfortune. Don't worry about it, son." But Gabriel wasn't convinced. There was something about the way Henrique had looked at him, something genuine and full of pain. An uneasiness began to grow inside him, though he didn't know exactly why. That night, as Henrique prepared his nets to go out to sea, the sound of the waves brought him comfort. He knew that facing Paulo would be difficult, but he was determined. The scars of the past were his driving force. The truth had to come out, no matter the price. In Paulo Torres' mansion, the meeting room was packed with influential figures. Politicians, businessmen, and lawyers occupied the chairs of the chair, while Paulo remained standing at the head of the table, his imposing presence projecting authority. The eyes will turn to him when he starts to falar. "Henrique is a small problem, but we cannot underestimate it," he declared, pausing to observe the reactions. "He wants me to publicly confess something that everyone in this room would prefer to explain." A nervous murmur percourred our atmosphere. Many of them have benefited from the environmental disaster of years ago. The chemical industry explosion had been buried under layers of manipulated judicial processes and archived investigations. But Henrique is now trying to unearth the truth. "And did you explain everything?" perguntou politician, enxugando o suor da testa. "Isso can destroy our careers." "That's why we need to move quickly," Paulo responded. "Neutralize him before he gets enough support." Two lawyers set out to discredit Henrique publicly, exploring his humble life to paint him as an opportunist. Another suggestion is to press the local fisherman to isolate it. Paulo listened to his suggestions with a slight acknowledgement. But in his intimate heart, he knew that Henrique would not be so easily broken. He had seen determination in the fisherman's eyes, something that few people knew he possessed. While there in Henrique's modest house, Gabriel arrived unexpectedly. He has spent hours thinking about conversations like his father and our intense smells of Henrique. I felt that there was something deeper behind the accusations against Paulo. Henrique, surprised to see or young, or received with mistrust. "Or what do you want?" he asked, crossing his arms. "I want to understand what is happening," Gabriel answered sincerely. "Why did you ask for a quilo to my country? Why no oil or money?" Henrique hesitated. He observed or raped for a few moments before responding. "Dinero does not contain or is destroyed. Paulo didn't just throw food on our tables. He threw lives, dreams." In Henrique's voice, he carried a weight that Gabriel couldn't ignore. Gabriel felt something in his throat. He always admired the country's success, but now he began to cast a shadow behind his apparently exemplary home. Still, the idea is that Henrique could also be lying or disturbing. Once again, Paulo received a detailed report about Henrique. Nothing seemed compromising at first glance, but the lawyer suggested something that could be used. He lost his wife shortly after the disaster. "This could be an emotional weakness that we can explore," he suggested. Paulo heard in silence, but his thoughts wandered. In Gabriel's presence at the dinner table, the night was full of unfinished questions. He knew that the son was beginning to mistrust, and he was more worried than Henrique. In the shadow of his house, Henrique looks out for his starry sky. I was not alone in his fight, he knew that. But in the presence of Gabriel, that night awakened a slight hope. Perhaps there was a way to achieve justice, even among those linked to the accused. In the small central square of the fishing village, the sound of whispering voices, Priencia or R. Henrique had gathered the fishermen and their families for a frank conversation. When the light illuminated the marked faces of the daily struggle, the tension was palpable. Some avoid their smell, while others are faced with expectation. "Eu sei que estão com medo," Henrique said, his voice firm, but with a tone of empathy. But Paulo Torres cannot continue living as he knows nothing has happened. We lose more than fish that explode. We lose lives, and it is time to demand justice. A heavy silence fell upon the group. Some trocaram nervous noses, while others opened the points in the contained raiva. A woman, Dona Marisa, who had lost her husband in a disaster, immediately went to Falar. Is he retaliating? People like us don't have to face a man like Paulo. Ele tem money, Potter. His voice wavered, filled with sadness. Henrique breathed out, feeling or weighing her words. He knew that the community's media were legitimate, but he also knew that we could not continue living in silence. Before you could respond, another fisherman, João, raised his voice. Marisa is right, but Enrique is also right. We cannot stand still as long as he lives, not luxurious on the slopes of our suffering. If you don't pay for ISO, how else are you going to protect us? João's words began to move the group. Henrique perceived that he needed something else to inspire them. He then shared his memories, his suffering, and the promise he had made to Clara, his deceased wife, to fight for justice here and there. It's not for me, he said, smelling around, and for all of us. Our children deserve to grow up in a place where we can fish, swim, and live peacefully. A mute atmosphere. Some assanaram in concordancia, while others, embora hesitant, begin to demonstrate support. At the end of the meeting, a small group volunteered to help Enrique organize a plan. Ienda had hope, but also hope. While doing so, Gabriel watched the dinner from a distance, hidden in the shadows. Tinha decided to follow Enrique after his conversation the previous night, curious to understand more about his intentions. O que viu naquela reunião abalou suas convicções. Enrique was not a homem moved by vingança, but by a deep desire for justice. Gabriel began to wonder what place or country he was willing to hide the truth from. The next time, Gabriel confronted Enrique again, this time with more determination. Or what did you really want? Perguntou, facing the fisherman, no solos. Enrique sighed, realizing that the young man was sincere in his search for answers. I want your father to confess and pay for the lives he destroyed. But more than anything, I want it to truly come true so that it never happens again. Henrique's words ressoaram Gabriel, but before he could respond, a black car passed by, wandering along the street in front of Henrique's house. Their occupants, men in suits, will observe dinner with calculating eyes before continuing onwards. Henrique percebeu o sinal. Paulo was increasing the pressure. Gabriel, uncomfortable as he had witnessed, returned home more confused than ever. Na mansão found o pai no escritório, mas hesitou em questioná-lo. Paulo, on the other hand, perceived the child's concern and decided to cut off any attempt at dialogue. Gabriel, you are young and have a good heart, but you do not understand how the world works. Henrique is playing a perigoso game, and it's best that you said he was playing. But Gabriel could not draw the faces of the two fishermen at the meeting, especially Henrique's. There was some genuine naquele homem that Pei had never shown. For the first time, Gabriel began to question whether his loyalty was in the wrong place. As he woke up for a new day, Enrique felt a different weight on his shoulders. It was not more sozinho. The community began to find its voice, and Gabriel, himself reluctant, seemed to be increasingly closer to understanding the meaning of justice. Paulo Torres's desk was spacious, decorated with solid wood furniture and shelves full of impeccably lined books. Gabriel wandered off, sniffing for the environment that always reflected the power of his country. Something in that space now seemed oppressive. Be careful. Start storing the files stored in a cabinet next to the large table. Your most important information is in the number of documents. These were old contracts, financial reports, and correspondence. Suddenly, he found an envelope marked with a familiar symbol, the logo of the ancient chemical industry. When I opened it, I saw letters and reports that revealed structural problems ignored before the explosion. Even more disturbing, there were exchanged correspondence between Paulo and other executives, suggesting that they had chosen to minimize the risk to economize on costs. Gabriel felt a no stomach. Those pages were more than evidence. It was confirmation of what Henrique had said. The devastation that marked the city was not an accident, but rather a deliberate accident. He made the envelope quickly to the steps in the corridor, put everything back on as it is and on the desk, trying not to show any nervousness. Hours later, while Paulo was reviewing reports at the dinner table, Gabriel decided to confront him. "Pai, what really happened in the factory?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Paulo raises his eyes, confirming the file with attention before responding. "We just talked about Iso, Gabriel. It was an accident. No more or what to say." But Gabriel was not easily convinced. Are the documents not on your desk? They don't seem to tell the same story. Paulo's expression hardens. He got up slowly, approaching the child with a smell that mixed authority and irritation. You don't understand what you're saying, Gabriel. There are things that you don't need to know. This matter has already been buried. Gabriel recalled a step, feeling the weight of his country's words. For the first time, he insergu o homem behind the impeccable facade, someone willing to protect his interests at any cost. Without saying anything else, leave the room. Your thoughts are in turmoil. While there in the villa, Henrique began to notice signs that Paulo was intensifying his threats. 2 fishermen report receiving visits from men who gently advise them to stay away from Henrique. Likewise, it is not collected. The news that Gabriel carried him secretly was to hope that he didn't even know he existed. Later that night, Gabriel was tied up at Henrique's house. He carried the envelope with him, still hesitating about what to do. With the battery in the port, he was received with surprise. Você de novo? Henrique perguntou, olhando para o youth com mistrust. I have something for you, Gabriel said, handing over the envelope with care. I hope someone can help. Henrique opened the package, and as he read the documents, his eyes were filled with disbelief and a renewed sense of determination. Why are you doing this? Asked Henrique, without hiding his surprise. Gabriel breathed before answering. Because maybe you have a reason. Maybe my father needs to be confronted. I just want to know that I'm doing something certain. Henrique watched the young man with attention, realizing that in the fight for the truth, he now has an improbable ally. Likewise, I knew that this choice would put both of them in danger. As soon as the lights of the houses in the house were turned off, it seemed heavier in the dark. In truth, it was closer, but the cliffs were just beginning to reveal themselves. Henrique was sitting at the kitchen table. Your parents surrendered to Gabriel, with your backs to his front. So the words in the documents were clear as water that he loved so much, but the weight of what they meant was immeasurable. Each line was incontrovertible proof that Paulo Torres and his allies had profited from lives. Gabriel, sitting on the other side of the table, watched as a fisherman in silence. The small kitchen was simple, with worn-out furniture, but the atmosphere was filled with tension. Henrique raised the eyes of both fathers, fixing them, not young. Do you have any idea what this means? Henrique asked, securing 2 documents firmly. Seu pai não vai aceitar isso passivamente. He will reagir. Gabriel nodded, but his expression showed determination. Henrique remained silent for a moment, endorsing the youth in front of him. It was difficult to believe that Gabriel, Paulo's son, had the courage to cross the line between the privilege and truth. But at the same time, Henrique knew that Gabriel still did not fully understand, or that he was in a game. We will decide to continue ahead. You need to be prepared, Henrique said, his voice firm. He is going to attack you. He is going to try to destroy his reputation. And maybe I tied worse. Gabriel swallowed it dry, but did not deviate or smell it. You are ready. I want to do part diso. That night, while planning his next steps, Henrique explained that his ideas need to be presented in a way that they cannot be ignored. Barely reporting Paulo would not be enough. They need support from the media and the community, as well as a strategic moment to expose the truth. There's a charity event that I'm going to organize in a few days, Gabriel suggested. He will be surrounded by influential people and day laborers. It would be impossible to ignore anything revealed there. Henrique nodded slowly. A idea made sense, but traced cliffs. They will need to plan every detail carefully to avoid Paulo or his allies failing to understand the situation. We are going to need more proof, said Henrique, and also testimonies, people who can confirm the impact of the disaster. Gabriel was thoughtful for a moment, then responded, I know some people we can help. Industry officials who were appointed at the time. They may be willing to falter if we approach them. You two will agree to divide these tasks. Gabriel would try to convince the former factory officials to play sports, while Henrique would mobilize the community to guarantee support. But they both knew that the clock was against them. The next day, Henrique went to Villa Pesquera to talk with those who had joined his cause. We present the documents as proof and reinforcement that with Gabriel's help, we have a real opportunity to confront Paulo. Some were still reticent, but by force of the evidence, they reassented to hope in many. Meanwhile, Gabriel visited old colleagues from his country, people who had worked in the factory and lost everything after the explosion. Some still have half a mind to follow, but others agree to help, tired of carrying the weight of Omisão. When night falls again, Enrique and Gabrielle will meet in the small kitchen to exchange information. Despite the tiredness, there was a new moment of determination in both of our eyes. "Are we ready?" Gabriel asked, unsure. Enrique has a small smile, something strange on his marked face. "No, but we are more lost than ever." The alliance between the fisherman and the businessman's son was improbable, but began to take shape. We both knew that we were treading on dangerous ground, but we also knew that there was no way to turn back. The sea was turning, and with it came the possibility of justice. Gabriel crossed the quiet corridors with tense steps. The confrontation was inevitable. The silent silence of the PAI's desk seemed to announce a storm that would break. Approximate. Upon entering, she found Paulo standing next to Janella with the most crossed shores. It is not necessary to turn around to know what the fish was. "You don't understand anything you're saying, Gabriel." "Asha, the world is white and white. Everything I did was to protect this family, to build something greater." "On account of other families?" Gabriel retorted, feeling the heat of the Reva grow. "How many lives were destroyed for your profit? This is not protection, it is selfishness." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Paulo takes some steps in the direction of his son, his imposing posture. "Você é meu filho, Gabriel. Think carefully before bringing your own family." Gabriel didn't respond. He barely got out of bed, feeling the weight of his father's words like a cold sheet of paper. "I did not fund. I knew that I had crossed a point without return." While there, in the fishing village, Enrique faced his own battle. Two men in dark suits will appear at his house that afternoon, their intentions evident even before they meet. "A friendly warning." Disumdale is adjusting the palette. "Paulo Torres does not like to be challenged. You still have time to desist." Enrique remains immobile or remains firm. "If this is a warning, consider me warned. Now Siam gives me a property." The men are in Trail Harem, surprised with the lack of half a non-fisherman, but they will not insist. When he formed, Enrique felt the weight of the ameaça. It was not just that he was on the cliff. The entire community could be reached. However, the events that night gave rise to a cruel letter that Paulo was willing to play hard. A small fishing boat was set on fire, its lights illuminating the horizon. Enrique ran to help, but it was too late. The message was clear. No one was safe. Next time, the tension in the room was palpable. Some fishermen, scared, began to reconsider their support for Enrique. But others, enraged by the attack, reaffirmed their determination to fight. Gabriel, knowing about the incident, returned to Enrique's house. He found the fisherman not falling, looking for the charred remains of the boat. "Sinto muito por isso," said Gabriel with sincerity. Enrique turned slowly, his eyes full of tiredness, but also of resolution. "Isso just proved that we are not on the right path. They do not inflate a boat if it is not in summer." Gabriel stayed silent, admired Enrique's courage. Even under pressure, the fisherman remained unabated. But they both knew that Paulo's retaliation was long overdue. The large hall of the luxury hotel was illuminated by imposing lights and decorated with extravagant flowers. Paulo Torres walked through a charity event with a calculated smile, meeting investors and influential figures. His presence dominated the atmosphere, as always. Porém, on that day, there was something different. A hidden tension, quasi imperceptible, but present in its movements and not paying attention that it launched around. Gabriel and Enrique were in the same room, strategically positioned. While Enrique stood at a distance, observing every detail, Gabriel attempted to move naturally, conversing briefly with family acquaintances. We both knew that this would be the only opportunity to expose the truth irrefutably. When the event was over, Paulo went up to the box for a speech. His voice was confident, and every word was calculated to impress the guests. "Today we celebrate our contribution to society," said it with a self-sufficient smile. "Our efforts have transformed lives and built a better future for future generations." The audience applauded, but Gabrielle, sitting at one of the tables, felt the fervent blood. Ella olhou for Enrique, who owes a brief period of confirmation. It was her moment. Gabriel got up and walked in the direction of the box. The surprise on Paolo's face was immediate, but he quickly tried to mask his concern. "Señoras y señores," Gabriel came, his tremendous voice slightly not starting, but gaining force quickly. "I would like to add to something that my father just said." Paolo tried to intervene, but Gabriel continued, holding the microphone firmly. Everything he says here is true. Little do we know that years ago, my country and its allies caused an environmental disaster that destroyed the lives of hundreds of families in our region. The living room is in absolute silence. The faces of the two guests alternated between disbelief and discomfiture. Enrique took advantage of the moment and progress, carrying a paste-chea of documents. "When you enter the box, place the content on the table next to the microphone. These are the documents that prove Paulo Torres' connection with the chemical industry explosion," Enrique said, his voice ringing out loud. "No one here can ignore the truth. A gain in negligence will destroy our community." Paulo tried to react, but his expression of despair brought his composure. Press the microphone, trying to recover or control the situation. "These accusations are absurd," he said, but his voice seemed less firm than before. "Everything is part of a plan to discredit me." Henry did not recover. "The documents fail by themselves, and it's not just daddies. I have testimonials, people who will lose everything because of their schools." At the bottom of the living room, day laborers began to build cameras, recording every word. At midday, Paulo's expression is even more dated. "Você fala de transformação e futuro melhor," Gabriel said, now facing the situation directly. "But how can you build something on the foundations of the suffering of so many people?" Paulo remained silent, unable to respond. His mask was falling. The weight of truth finally seemed unbearable. The event ended in chaos. Guests left quickly, some muttering words of indignation, others panicking to avoid associations with Paulo. Day laborers or cercarum asking questions that he couldn't answer. Enrique and Gabriel walked together through the side door, long two holographs, but with certainty that they had given the most significant blow then. In truth, it was finally exposed, and Paulo, still powerful, was no more untouched. Paulo Torres' desk was buried in silence. The light of Manhã enters big shoes, but it does not show comfort. He was sitting at his imposing wooden table, with his hands intertwined and his eyes fixed on an indefinite point. In front of him, a pile of days with devastating manchettes. Rich businessman involved in environmental scandal. Photos of Enrique and Gabriel at the charity event illustrate a layer, along with documents that have been disclosed to the media. Paulo knew that the fence was dating. Lawyers, previously confident, now suggest that he publicly disgrace himself and seek judicial agreements to avoid a greater disaster. But Gabriel really was an abalava. A betrayal of the object or fairview is more likely than any external attack. However, when the sound stopped in the room, I saw Gabriel standing, with the same expression, determined that there was no event. There was something different in our Olos de Filo. Not raiva, but something deeper, something that Paulo could not ignore. "Why fez isso?" Paulo asked, his voice breaking, quasi a whisper. Gabriel stepped forward, taking a deep breath before responding. "Because it was a certain thing to do. You always said that our family should be an example. But how can we be so with so many lies?" Paulo lowered his eyes, feeling the weight of his son's words. The silence between them was interrupted by the sound of the telephone that was ringing incessantly, but he ignored it. The world was falling apart, and he knew it was time to make a decision. Later that day, Paulo convened a press group. The room was full of reporters, cameras, and microphones set up for him. Enrique was at the bottom of the room, observing in silence. Gabriel was at his side, standing firm, more visibly nervous. Paulo went up to the pulpit, turned on the microphone, and heard the crowd. For the first time, his confident posture seemed weakened. He cleaned his throat before speaking. "For years, I built my reputation as an entrepreneur, dedicated to the progress and well-being of the community. But the truth is that we don't always make certain choices." A room filled with absolute silence. Each word seemed to weigh tons. "I made decisions that would result in disastrous consequences for the fishing village and for many families. Ignore the warnings about the risks of the chemical industry's operations, placing profits above lives. Here I come to admit my responsibility. The camera flashes illuminate the room as Paulo makes his confession. He also mentioned names of others involved, exposing the network of corruption and profit that had allowed the disaster to occur. Henrique, hearing the words, felt a mixture of relief and sadness. A confession did not mean that I was lost, but it was a step in the direction of justice. Gabriel, on the other hand, was fighting back his tears. Seeing his father give up power for no reason was a moment he would never dream of. When the collective ended, Paulo left the pulpit in silence, his figure seeming smaller than ever. Henrique and Gabriel trocaram a brief, more significant olhar. They both knew that the battle was long overdue, but at that moment, they had truly won. At first, it was quiet in the fishing village, as waves broke gently against or fell, and some 2 gavots flying over the sea seemed like a sign that life continued. Henrique was in a small boat, adjusting the nets for the next fishing trip. Although it gives Paulo Torres public confession of the changes he promised to make, he knew that reconstruction would be slow. As he pushed a cord, he heard steps behind him, virou-se, and saw Gabriel approaching, with a shy, faceless smile. "Achei que você já terá parte," said Henrique, without interrupting his work. "I thought I'd go," Gabriel responded, handing over our bags. "But I didn't succeed. I still have a lot to learn and repair." Henrique nodded slightly but did not respond immediately. The young man had moved. He was no longer the predator protected by the shadow of his country, but someone who understood the weight of his efforts and the impact of the world around him. Paulo Torres' confession praises the alicerces of the local elite. Investigações foram abertas, e many businessmen and politicians involved in the disaster foram called to lend accounts. At this time, the case continued to be covered as long as the village began to receive donations and promises of support. However, Henrique knew that promises would only become reality with persistence and vigilance. "What are you going to change now?" Gabriel asked, breaking the silence. Henrique long acorda e olhou para el mar. "Things never change from one hour to another, but it's a start, and now is everything we need to continue fighting." Gabriel sat in a nearby box, watching Henrique with silent admiration. The fisherman did not see himself as a hero, but for Gabriel, he was the example of integrity and courage that was missing in his life. Later that day, the village met in the central square. Henrique was received with applause and words of gratitude. "Thank you," but it was clear that the fight for justice was a collective effort. "This is not just about me or Paulo Torres. He is above all of us," he said, olhando para los faces conhecidos a sua forehead. "We cannot allow ganancia to silence us again. We need to protect our community for a few more years." The words were received with enthusiasm, but Henrique knew that the real work was just beginning. It requires structure, resources, and above all, hope. As the crowd dispersed, Gabriel approached again. He secured a small chain on my side, something Henrique had never seen before. "I found this among my mother's things," said Gabriel, handing the chain to Henrique. "São anotações dela. She always believed that it was true based on everything. Acho que você devia ter isso." Henrique opened his notebook and saw simple, more powerful phrases, written in delicate calligraphy. I felt an immediate connection with those words and a new sense of responsibility. "Obrigado, Gabriel." Her mind was a wise woman. The next few days, Gabriel began working as the fisherman, learning about their needs and helping to organize new projects. He knew that he could not undo the past, but he wanted to contribute to a better future. Henrique, in turn, felt renewed. He still bears the scars of what he had lost. He realized that his struggle had not been in vain. In fact, late in the day, he had made a promise of new horizons for his community. On the last night before leaving for sea again, Henrique found an anonymous letter in his pocket. The bill said, "You were brave. Continue like this. The sea is great, but justice is greater." He smiled, putting the letter in his bag. The fight was long overdue, but the path to new horizons had finally begun. Henrique's story teaches us that justice, though difficult, is always the most dignified path. It reminds us that truth has a cost, but also a transformative power that can change lives and communities. What would you have done in Gabriel's place? Would you have betrayed your family to stand up for what was right, or would you have remained silent out of convenience? The answer to this question can say a lot about who you are and your values. Click on the video that appears on your screen to continue this fascinating journey of self-discovery and explore more stories that invite us to reflect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content that can inspire you to be the best version of yourself. See you in the next video.